Ching, 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 ching. Welcome back. It's Professor Victor Singingeagle over here again. Oh, I forgot to wear my choker. Well, actually, I didn't wear my choker because it's cold. I told you the story once before, and it's going to be related to today's lecture a little bit. That is way back, and I apologize for all the me, I stuff, but when I was a student at the University of South Dakota, and this is back in the, I want to say early 2000s, right about the change of the millennium, and I was studying my butt off, and I had lots of other native classmates. I shouldn't say a lot, because, that was a PWI, predominantly white institution. Is that what it's called? I don't know. Mainstream college. It wasn't a tribal college, okay? And I had one of my chokers on, and some girl that was always picking on me, she says, "Why are you wearing that made in Taiwan? How come you're always wearing that made in Taiwan choker?" Because remember, this is the era of playing more Indian than thou. We're going to talk about that in a second. But anyway, she's asking me, why am I wearing a fake made in Taiwan choker? And I looked at her and said, "Oh, how did you know I made this choker in Taiwan?" But when I was making it, I had a really rough time finding the black hair pipe beads that I use for my chokers because there's no buffalo over here, so I had to improvise, make do with what was available, and so I used water buffalo horn instead of, American bison. And she looked at me like, she had that look on her face. And, well, never mind. Let's get into today's little mini. We talked about all this stuff already. We're going to revisit this because it's important for our class, Native Literature. You know that I'm always messing with you guys. Native literature and native culture, which are closely intertwined. Language is braided in there too, but I don't speak Dakota yet. Taking Dakota classes, but my Dakota sucks. So, we're going to focus on the literature and the culture. And at this point, we're looking at the generations of native writers. That is the first generation of native writers that we spoke about before. I'm going to scroll way down. I think it's a red box. People like, this is all the way from the 17th to 18th and the 19th century primarily. Samson Occam, he's a reverend. He was a Mohegan. William Apis, Simon Pokagon. I just ordered his book, Potawatomi. Zikalasa. Charles Eastman. Their main themes that we need to know about is that they dealt, here it is right here, the impact of colonization, the struggles with cultural identity, connection to the land, and cultural survival. Because you remember, these are the oldest of the old. This is the first generation. These are the OGs of native literature. So they had to be polite. They had to use what Gerald Visner called manifest manners in their writing, and be very ingratiating and polite in their writing, but also reveal that, hey, we're people too. The second generation, this is around the I want to say late 70s to the 80s, all the way up to the 90s. This is the second generation, spearheaded by N. Scott Momaday. Remember, he's the guy who helped pretty much single-handedly, really, was at the spear tip of the Native American Renaissance, and this is getting everybody all into Native literature again. Then Tiffany Midge, my buddy Gary, or my old professor Gary Hobson, Paula Gunn Allen, another one of my mentors, the late Paula Gunn Allen, Linda Hogan, Joy Harjo, Louise Erdrich. Wow, these people all write to me still. Well, Louise never does, but Joy does. Paula Gunn Allen passed away. Laura Tohi, we write all the time on Facebook. James Welch passed away. But remember, their key themes, I guess we can say, is resurgence, the clash between native traditions and modern society, and a big one, native identity. Who is and who isn't an Indian? Okay, so that's why I was talking about this. It's a big one because we used to get all hung up on this idea of native identity and playing more Indian than thou. Um, I'm more Indian than you because my car is an old beat up res car and you're driving a newer model. So, also known as comparative misfortune. I'm more Indian than you because I live in an old beat up trailer and your house is made out of brick. That's not fair. I'm not going to get into that. The third generation. This is what we're in right now. We're in allegedly the third generation of native authors. People like Tommy Orange, Rebecca Roanhorse, Stephen Graham Jones. I need to order some of his books. And David Hishka Wambly Waden. Those are just a few. There's a whole bunch more. 2000s to the present. These guys, their themes are, where do we go from here? Modern challenges, native humor, horror, crime, science fiction. Crime fiction and science fiction, 2000s to the present. Now I believe there's a little bleed over from some of these, especially Tiffany Midge. She does a whole. She kind of gets annoyed when people just stick her in a box that says only native literature. You're only a native author. So she was all stoked one day when she went into a bookstore and she found her book. I forgot what it's called. Bury My Heart at Chuck E. Cheese's, I think it was. And it wasn't in Indian or ethnic literature shelf. It was with all the other books. So she was pretty happy about that. But it's the idea of we natives are not stuck, frozen, and ossified in time. We are living, breathing human beings. And that's why you're going to see more native horror and crime fiction and science fiction. All right. I'm going to stand up here and talk too much. So pay attention to those boxes I put on our lesson plan, which I posted on e-learning. We already did the pop quiz review, so I don't need to do that again. But just to remind you that it's now open and it's due as soon as possible. And if you do some research, cite it, and say, here's what I got, that's the best way to get an A. Now, we're also going to look at King of the Thai Snakes from Read, Listen, Tell. I'm going to put on my old man glasses and pull up the book. I got the wrong one. Oops. Read, Listen, Tell. Edited by Sophie McCall, Deanna Reeder, David Gardner, and Gabrielle Lorndale Hill. And the book, or the story, appears in our book on probably says right there, page 29, page 29. And there's a whole bunch of naughty words in here, so I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but I just want to draw your attention to what the heck is a Thai snake anyway. Sometimes a Thai snake is known as a tide snake. And in my tribe, we call that snake Mishipeshu, which is a sort of like a cat dragon, which has really got me interested. And know that I lived in Taiwan and China for a while, you see. And I'll just pull this up. Come on, give me. There we go. The very oldest of the old Chinese stories say that there's a water dragon that has horns, and it kind of is a mix of a cat and a lizard, a little stubby feet maybe, or some versions no feet at all. I should have brought mine. I have one exactly like this, except a little bit better quality. There is these two dragons here, cat dragons. That's really cool. And what happens is a lot of times these ancient, really old things, uh, farmers are plowing their fields and they dig these things up. And my beloved sainted wife gave me one of those as a wedding present. So cool. She said farmer had dug it up and gave it to her, so she gave it to me. That was my wedding gift from her. Anyway, I still have it in my medicine bundle at home in Mount Shasta. But Mishipeshu appears both in the indigenous Americas and in China, which is really cool to think about. Let's get rid of that and go back to this. And Mishipeshu, or the tide snake or tide snake, has a lot of connotations. One of them is blessing, one of them is protection. It's usually associated with water, living in water or in rivers, and they come up when the people are being threatened or the river itself is being threatened. Sometimes they are malevolent if you yourself are naughty or not worthy, or sometimes they're quite benevolent in respect that they're protector spirits. They're very ancient, sacred creatures. And that's kind of the background to the story. So Craig Womack, who is Muskogee Creek Cherokee, that creature appears in their stories as well. It says here, let's read it. Page 29. Craig S. Womack is a Muskogee Creek and Cherokee author and professor of Native American literature at Emory University. He received his PhD from the University of Oklahoma in 1995 and has taught both there and at the University of Lethbridge and the University of Nebraska. He is a leading figure in Native American literary studies. Among his published works is the widely influential Red on Red Native American Literary Separatism, 1999, as well as the critically acclaimed novel Drowning in Fire, 2001. The protagonist in King of Tie Snakes is Josh Heneha, a Muskogee Creek teenager growing up in Oklahoma in the 1970s. Josh enjoys reading, doesn't like sports, has a crush on the athletic and popular Jimmy, and is an outcast among the other boys in his small town. Except for the homoeroticism there. The kid sounds a lot like me. Enjoy reading, don't like sports. Anyway, this is not me, he passionately desires Jimmy's attention and fantasizes about communicating secretly with him. Woven through the story are Josh's memories of fishing with his grandfather, during which time his grandfather would tell him stories about his Creek heritage, the story about the king of the tie snakes, a water snake with powers of transformation. There's the word I forgot to tell you, transformation. That's important. Provides a framework for Josh not only to resist homophobia and prejudice, but also to embrace his cultural and sexual identities. So this character is, from what I can tell, and I'm telling you too much already, he is a sympathetic, round character, and probably a transformative character as well, or transforming character, in that he's learning who he really is. He's a youngster, and this is Josh Heneha, and he's learning about his own sexuality, and we can sympathize with him because as we read, we know more about him and we start to care about him. Let's jump to page, because there's a whole bunch of naughty words in here, and I want to skip them. The kid, Josh, is part black, I believe, and he's also part native, and he's a little bit effeminate, and all the kids keep dropping, calling him an F word and picking on him. And at one point, the kids are all swimming together, and they're all having a contest to see who can swim all the deepest and grab maybe a rock or something from the bottom of this really deep lake and bring it up. So let's see, we're on page 33. Lenny spoke up. Let's have a diving contest. The first one to bring up a rock from the bottom of the lake would win, he explained. The boys argued about who would go first. Josh sat alone on the edge of the raft, staring wistfully, trance-like, over the side, his feet dangling in the water. They chose the diving order. Sammy would take the first turn, of course, then Jimmy and Lenny. They all agreed Josh would go last, since, as Sammy said, I won't tell how I did it. And when I send Jimmy under, he'll be ready to believe my powers. Wait a minute, is this kid Josh or Jimmy? No, it is Josh. Okay, I gotta stay focused. So, I'm gonna skip over. There's some flashbacks. This is on page 36. There's a flashback where Josh is remembering his old fishing trips with his dad and grandpa, and hearing the story about the misipeshu, or the Thai snake. And then we jump over to page 38. I bet he's got the rock in his hand right now, laughed Jimmy. Sammy threw in, nah, he's probably got something else in his hand. All the boys laughed. 30 more seconds passed, and a smothering silence fell over them. So apparently, Josh is going last. The other kids weren't able to reach the bottom and grab a rock. And now Josh's turn. He's the littlest and the most effeminate boy among the group. And he's swimming, he's diving deeper and deeper. And all the other boys are still up on the raft waiting for him to come up. Let's keep reading. The boys left. 30 more seconds passed, and a smothering silence fell over them. The boys began to take deep drags on their cigarettes and look down at their bare toes. They coughed nervously and listened to the water slapping the sides of the raft. Sammy tried to kill time by blowing smoke rings, but the wind swept them out over the water. Finally, Lenny spoke. What do y'all suppose happened to him? I think we ought to swim to shore, Sammy said coolly. We don't know for sure if he drowned. We can't just leave him here, said Jimmy. We gotta at least stay until we know what happened. What are we going to tell everybody when we get home? Said Sammy. We better get our story straight, or his folks are liable to blame us. It ain't our fault the blankety blank head can't swim. The other boys looked over at Sammy and saw they were supposed to laugh again. Jimmy said, I ain't staying here for a spell. Not that I'm afraid of getting in trouble or anything. I just want to see if maybe he comes back up. Lenny sided with Jimmy and decided to stay on the raft. Sammy said, Well, while y'all are sitting here and getting cold in the wind, I'll be stretched out in the sun on the bank. Sammy slid into the water and swam for the shore. So I'm going to skip over to the next couple of pages, because remembering the little boy, the youngest, is diving deeper and deeper. And finally, breaking one by one. trying to find it. Oh, here it is, the bottom of page 38. So Josh is coming back up. He has a rock. He is winning the contest. Actually, it's the middle. Barump, barump. Under the raft, Josh heard the boy bumping against it up above, steady as a heartbeat. He thought he had better come back up before he stretched his miraculous powers too thin, and the boys went home, leaving him for drowned. Then he wouldn't get to test his secret messages to Jimmy. Josh dived and ducked under the raft. Just before he broke the surface, he felt a sudden tug on his leg. A clump of fishing line had wrapped around his ankle, and when he swam up, he had pulled all the slack out, binding the entangled mesh tightly. He felt with his hands, unable to see in the murky water, the other end of the line that was twisted around the cable that anchored the raft to the bottom. He dropped the rock. Had it been a single strand of line, he could have broken it easily, since fishermen use light test weights for the bass and crappie in the lake. But with a whole clump wound around itself, the strength of the line was greatly magnified. Each tug dug into the flesh of his ankle with a sharp little searing that he couldn't exactly call pain. He almost wanted to laugh. Then, panic-stricken, he placed both feet against the cable and pulled with his hands. Josh strained and jerked. "Oh, God, no, please let me loose. Let me get loose. I won't try another trick like this," he thought as he pulled at the line. He started to cry out in terror and swallowed some water. He began to choke and cough, fighting to keep holding his breath. He cut his palms on the thin strands, and in desperation he felt around, sightless in the murky water, to locate the individual strands. He began breaking them one by one. He had torn apart 5 or 6 of them when something brushed past his chest. Josh felt his arms flailing in the water around him. He opened his eyes and saw the underwater city where he was tethered to, the spokes of somebody's wagon wheel, parked on the street in front of a building. A large channel catfish with a Fu Manchu mustache was swimming in place just between the top porch rail and the roof of the building, making underwater burbling noises that sounded like garbled words. The fish darted inside the front window, and Josh watched him enter. A painted sign above the door read, "Grayson Brothers, dealers in general merchandise." So I'm going to stop it right there because we can already see that Josh is, well, I'm not going to tell you what to think. Read the book for yourself. That is on page 29 from Read, Listen, Tell. A little bit of what's going on there. I'll let you figure out what happens in the story, and I'm going to knock it off there and remind you this is Native American literature. So do some reading and some thinking about these characters, about the plot, and about what Laura Tohe says about how Native literature is often the best literature because of the very fact that we interweave our culture and our stories, ancient stories and values and traditions, into more than just like some dime novel you pick up off the shelf. Now, some notes that you do need to pay attention to. Here are some important notes for tests and upcoming tests. Archetype. Noun, a universal symbol. Character type or story pattern or theme that appears across cultures and time periods, expressing shared human experiences or values. This is bigger than maybe what we might call a trope. So archetype is allegedly universal. That means something that most people will agree on. not always. Characterization, the way an author shows what a character is like through their actions, words, thoughts, appearance, and how others respond to them. We've mentioned that before. Comparative misfortune, I mentioned that before. The act of judging the poor circumstances of others against one's own. For natives, especially, it's to one up another's misfortune, to exclude that person from a perceived group. And it's related to what Singingeagle calls more Indian than thou, which is a divisive concept meant to challenge the Indianness of others based upon appearance, language, circumstances, and material culture. See comparative misfortune. You're not a real Indian if you don't point with your lips, or you're not a real Indian if you don't drive a beat up old res truck, whatever. That's playing more Indian than thou. That was a big thing back in the 80s and 90s and all the way up to the early 2000s. And it's kind of going away, thank God. For example, is you go up to Canada, you'll see that the Canadians aren't as into this and outing pretendians and wannabes as their brothers and sisters down here in the States, you see, but we won't get into that. Motif. What is a motif? It is a recurring symbol, image, word, or phrase within a story or across stories. They are more concrete than tropes and can often reinforce a theme. So a motif that we might have just read is, the snake, the horned snake that lives in the water and pops up in a lot of stories. A stock character we talked about before. It's a subset of an archetype. It's a familiar, easily recognized character that appears again and again and again in stories, such as a trickster, a wise elder, a jealous rival, a brave hero, whatever. That's just a stock character. You can say the high school bully, and everybody knows who that is. Theme, the main message or underlying meaning of a story that the author explores through characters, plot, and symbol. So if we're looking at the theme of when I was mentioning these generations, for example, I talked about their themes: culture, survival, first generation, second generation, identity, the third generation, pretty much wider and anything goes. And Indians living in modern day times and how we persist and how we thrive. So those are themes. How about a trope? It is a patternized, quote, big idea or literary device used to convey a concept, meaning, or effect. It often relies on cultural literary conventions and can sometimes be viewed negatively because they're often overused, cliched, or predictable and unoriginal. I could think of the Marvel comics or the Marvel movies, and we start getting into those characters start turning into tropes because they're starting to get overused and cliched. A lot of the people complain about Hollywood movies these days and even literature. Just an example for those of us who love native literature. A major trope that drives us nuts as natives is the romance novel. And romance novels usually have the word savage in it. And it's some strong young Indian brave. And he's usually half Indian and half white, or part, whatever, some Indian and white. So he's got a little bit of the savagery in him. And some non-native, I'll just say a Wahpeton woman, young girl, innocent, comes trolloping along into the we don't want to say into the frontier or the edge of new colony areas and new villages. They're building frontier villages, and maybe some bad tribe comes in and burns the village down, and the only survivor is a young innocent maiden, and she's rescued by a half white, half Indian from another tribe, and he takes her half unconscious body and throws her over his horse and rides off and nurses her back to health, and they fall in love. And she says, "No." He says, "Give me." And she says, "No." And that's a trope. It's a stereotype, overused, cliched, predictable, unoriginal thing that shows up again and again in these bodies ripper, um, savage fury, savage passion, savage gentleman, all those stupid novels just drive us nuts. And that's enough because I already talked for 30 minutes and 31 seconds. I'll knock it off there. Thank you so much for being so patient with me, and we'll talk to you later.